They laughed at the farmer's daughter in her worn-out shoes, till she stood at the head of the boardroom and changed the future with just one word: Madam Chairwoman. Emily's shoes made a soft sound as she walked across the smooth, shiny floor of the big boardroom. She was early. The long glass tables stretched across the center of the room like a runway, surrounded by expensive leather chairs. The windows gave a view of the city skyline, with tall buildings and traffic far below. It was nothing like the farmland she came from, where dirt roads stretched for miles and cows grazed under open skies. But Emily wasn't nervous. I'd come here for a reason. As she stepped into the room, a few people looked up from their phones and laptops. Some of them frowned, others smirked. Emily was wearing a plain dress and simple shoes. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. There was no expensive watch on her wrist, no designer handbag in her hand. She looked like someone who had taken the wrong elevator, like a secretary, or maybe someone delivering lunch. One man whispered to another, who let the intern in. Emily walked to the head of the table and gently placed her laptop on the polished surface. She plugged it in, opened a presentation file, and waited. One by one, the board members of the company filed in. They were powerful men and women, dressed in tailored suits, carrying expensive pens and folders with gold logos. They were the kind of people who were used to being listened to, not the kind who listened to someone like her. When everyone was seated, a tall man with gray hair cleared his throat. He was the assistant to the CEO. "We have a guest presentation this morning," he said without enthusiasm. Emily Walker, daughter of George Walker from Walker Farms, will share some ideas related to sustainable agriculture. Right. Let's try. To keep this short, a few people chuckled. One woman looked up from her phone and said, "Is she going to tell us how to milk cows?" Another laughed. "Maybe she brought fresh eggs for breakfast." Emily heard it all. She noticed the way they looked at her, some with amusement, others with boredom, none with respect. Instead, she stood up, clicked her presentation forward, and began to speak. "Good morning," she said in a clear voice. "I grew up on a farm where the soil tells you everything, tells you when to plant, when to water, and when to wait. It's a lot like business, really." The moment she spoke, a few eyebrows went up. Her accent was rural, soft, and calm, not the kind of sharp, fast-talking voice they were used to hearing in these rooms. Some of them leaned back in their chairs. Already convinced this was going to be a waste of time, Emily didn't let their silence stop her. She clicked to the next slide. It showed a satellite image of a large farm divided into green, brown, and golden patches. "This is my family's farm," she continued. 3 years ago, we were close to bankruptcy. Weather patterns had changed, crop prices dropped. We were losing everything. But instead of selling, we adapted. We installed solar panels, we started using drone monitoring, cut waste by 40%, and increased yield by 60%. This isn't just a story about saving a farm. It's about changing the way we grow food and the way we run business. One man coughed loudly, trying to interrupt. Another leaned over to his neighbor and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "Does she know where she is?" This isn't a town hall, but Emily kept going. Her slides showed real data charts, comparisons, maps. She spoke about carbon reduction, market gaps, logistics. She spoke with calm confidence, her words backed by experience, not theory. Her fingers didn't shake, her voice didn't crack. Still, the boardroom remained cold. Some of the members pretended to check their emails. A few whispered among themselves. Someone even took a selfie and posted it with the caption, "Cowgirl in the boardroom." Laughter followed, but not everyone laughed. At the end of the long table sat an older man in a black suit. He had said nothing since Emily entered the room. He simply watched. His name was Mr. Raymond Drake, the CEO of the company. He had built the empire from scratch and was known for being sharp, fearless, and extremely selective about who he listened to. Right now, he was listening carefully. Emily, unaware of the silent storm she was causing, reached the final slide. It was a simple sentence written in bold. "You can grow faster when your roots run deeper." She closed her laptop, looked around, and gave a small nod. That's all I wanted to share. Thank you for your time." For a second there was silence. Then came a slow, sarcastic clap from one of the younger board members. "Very inspirational," he said with a smirk. "Maybe next time bring some fresh corn samples too." A few laughed again. Another added, "She sounds like one of those YouTube farmers who think going green solves everything. This is a billion-dollar boardroom, not a school project." Someone near the door whispered, "She'll be gone in 5 minutes. Just smile and let her leave." But Emily didn't move. She stood still, her face calm, eyes steady. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just waited. That was when Mr. Drake slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. The room immediately went silent. People turned to him, unsure what to expect. Mr. Drake walked to the front of the room. Everyone's eyes followed him. He stood next to Emily and looked around the room. "What did you call her?" he asked the man who made the corn joke. The man blinked. "Just a joke, sir." Double quotes. Mr. Drake didn't smile. He turned back to Emily and gave her a small nod of respect. Then he looked at the entire board and spoke clearly, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Let me introduce you again. This is not just Emily Walker, daughter of a farmer. This is Madam Chairwoman of the board, effective as of this morning." The shock was instant. One woman gasped. Another dropped her pen. A man stood up as if he had misheard. "What? What do you mean?" Mr. Drake turned back to the legal team. "Show them." The lawyers entered with folders. They handed documents to each board member. As they flipped through the pages, their faces changed. The numbers were clear. Emily Walker, through a quiet buyout of shares and partnerships, now owned a controlling interest, 51% in the very company they worked for. Nobody laughed now. Emily finally spoke, her voice steady. "I didn't come here to impress anyone. Came here because I believe this company can do better for the planet, for people, and yes, for profits. But first, we need to stop laughing at the wrong people." Mr. Drake smiled slightly and said, "You'd be wise to listen to her now." No one interrupted. No one whispered. Phones were put down, backs straightened. Respect filled the room, but it came too late. Emily looked around once more. She picked up her laptop, nodded to Mr. Drake, and walked toward the door. As she reached it, she paused, turned slightly, and said one final thing. "You'll find, gentlemen and ladies, that sometimes the strongest leaders grow up in the dirt." Then she walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces, shattered pride, in the beginning of a new chapter that none of them had seen coming. And outside, the city kept buzzing, unaware that the farmer's daughter had just planted new seeds in the heart of the corporate world, seeds that, soon enough, would change everything. While everyone in the boardroom had been busy laughing at Emily, none of them knew the journey she had already walked before that moment. What they saw was a simple girl in plain clothes with a farm accent. What they didn't see was the fire. Behind her quiet eyes, the years of learning, loss, rebuilding, and growth that brought her here. Emily had grown up on Walker Farms, a place that had been in her family for generations. The farm was large, but life was never easy. Her father, George Walker, was a hard-working man who believed in honest labor, early mornings, and never giving up. From the age of 8, Emily helped her father in the fields, feeding animals, planting crops, checking fences. When other kids were watching cartoons, she was learning how to fix a tractor engine or how to tell if a storm was coming just by looking at the clouds. She didn't complain. In fact, she loved it. Her mother used to say that Emily was born with the land in her blood, but the world changed. The farm struggled to keep up. Droughts became longer. Prices dropped. Big corporations took over local markets. Emily watched as farmers in their town lost their land, one by one. Her father fought to keep theirs alive, but debts grew like weeds, and money became a constant worry. At night, Emily could hear her parents whispering in the kitchen about loans and bills. Sometimes her father would sit silently on the porch, staring into the fields with tired eyes. When Emily turned 16, she made herself a promise. She would not let their farm die. Not like the others. Not without a fight. She had always been smart in school, especially in math and science. So she started reading. She found books on modern farming, sustainability, technology, while her classmates were focused on prom dresses and parties. She was researching solar irrigation and crop rotation algorithms. When it was time for college, she applied for scholarships quietly. Her parents couldn't afford tuition, and Emily didn't want to add more stress to their lives. But her grades were excellent, and she won a full scholarship to a top agricultural university. She packed her bags and left the farm with a heavy heart but strong purpose. College was a different world. Big buildings, fast talkers, expensive coffee.
At first, she felt out of place.
She wore second-hand clothes and spoke with a farm town accent. Some students mocked her. A few professors doubted her seriousness, but none of that mattered. She studied harder than anyone. She took extra courses. She worked part-time in the campus greenhouse and spent weekends in labs. She learned how drones could monitor crop health, how data could predict harvests, and how technology could save farms like hers. By the time she graduated, she had not only earned a degree, but also published 2 papers on sustainable farming and precision agriculture. One of those papers caught the attention of a retired billionaire named Mr. Walton. Mr. Walton had made his fortune in tech but left the corporate world after a health scare. He had started a foundation to support green innovations and was looking for people with fresh ideas. He invited Emily to a conference after reading her paper. She thought it was a prank at first, but she went, dressed in her best clothes, still simple, but neat-tanned, spoke in front of hundreds of experts. She explained how a small family farm could become a model for the future using solar power, smart sensors, and local partnerships. Mr. Walton sat in the front row, listening carefully. After her talk, he came up to her and said just one thing: "You think like a leader, not a follower." They kept in touch. Over time, they developed a partnership. Emily didn't want charity. She wanted investment and a chance to prove her ideas. Mr. Walton agreed. He gave her access to funds from his foundation, and she returned home to transform Walker Farms. It is something no one in the area had seen before. The changes didn't come easy. Some neighbors laughed. "What's that girl doing with those?" "Flying toys," they'd say, pointing at the drones. Others warned her father, "She's wasting time. Stick to what we know." But Emily kept going. She installed smart irrigation systems that saved water. She added solar panels to reduce electricity bills. She created an app that tracked weather and soil data to help plant at the best times. Slowly, the farm became more productive, costs dropped, harvests improved. She hired local workers and trained them on the new technology. They earned better wages, and their respect for her grew. But Emily didn't stop there. She reached out to other struggling farms in the area. She offered free workshops and shared what she learned. She helped them switch to organic methods and connected them with new buyers. She even created a small cooperative where farms pooled resources and shared profits. Within 2 years, the community changed. Farmers who had once been hopeless were now hopeful. Emily's success didn't go unnoticed. A small article in an agricultural magazine caught the attention of a business blogger who wrote about the farmer's daughter who outsmarted Silicon Valley. That article went viral. Soon, people started contacting her for advice. Colleges invited her to speak. Startups wanted to partner with her. Even some large corporations showed interest, but she turned most of them down. She had learned to be careful when Mr. Walton offered her a bigger challenge to take over a struggling but powerful company and bring in real change, she thought. Hard. It was risky. It meant leaving her farm again. It was also a chance to use what she knew on a much larger scale. And share buyouts over many months. Emily slowly gained power in the company from behind the scenes. Her name wasn't always on the paperwork. Mr. Walton had helped keep her involvement quiet until the time was right. They waited for the moment when she could walk into that boardroom, not just as a guest, but as the new owner. And that moment had come the day before the meeting. Emily had visited her father on the farm. He was sitting on the porch, drinking coffee from his favorite chipped mug. She sat beside him and watched the sun rise over the fields. "Tomorrow's a big day," she said. Her father nodded. "You nervous?" She smiled a little, looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "You were born for this, Emily. Don't let them talk down to you. You've earned your place." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for always believing in me." That night, she packed her simple bag, printed her presentation slides, and promised herself one thing: no matter how they looked at her, no matter what they said, she would not let them break her spirit, and she didn't. They had laughed at her. They had whispered jokes and rolled their eyes. But behind every slide in her presentation was a story, a lesson, a night spent working under a single bulb on the farm, a morning waking before dawn, a risk taken with everything on the line. They didn't know who she was, but they would. When the CEO stood and called her Madam Chairwoman, the truth began to shine. Emily wasn't just a farmer's daughter. She was a fighter, a leader, and a builder of futures, and this was only the beginning. The boardroom was filled with a strange silence. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, except this storm hadn't even fully arrived yet. Emily stood near the head of the table, laptop closed, her presentation finished. Her eyes looked around the room slowly, and she could feel the weight of judgment in the air. Most of the board members were still trying to hide their amused expressions. Some were smirking. Others were clearly just waiting for her to leave, so they could move on with their real meeting. One man was already whispering to the woman beside him. "That was adorable," he said in a low voice. "She really thinks she's changing the world with drone tractors." The woman laughed under her breath. "She probably thinks she's on Shark Tank." But not everyone in the room was, mocking her. At the very end of the long table sat a tall man in a dark blue suit, Mr. Raymond Drake, the company's CEO. His face was unreadable. He hadn't spoken a single word since Emily started her presentation. He hadn't smiled, hadn't frowned, hadn't blinked more than once or twice. He simply watched her with a look of deep thought, the kind that made it clear he wasn't just listening, he was studying. Emily noticed. She'd been warned about him. Raymond Drake had a reputation for being cold, precise, and always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. People said he didn't care about feelings, only numbers. That he once shut down an entire department just because their growth was 2% below target. She wasn't sure what to expect from him today. Suddenly, as if on cue, Mr. Drake moved, pushed back his chair slowly, and stood up. The scraping sound of his chair on the marble floor made everyone in the room freeze. Phones were lowered. Smirks disappeared. Even the man who had made the joke about drone tractors straightened his back. Mr. Drake didn't say anything. Right away, he stepped forward and walked toward Emily, his polished shoes clicking softly. The room watched, eyes bouncing between him and the young woman they had just finished mocking. Emily stayed calm on the outside, but her heart had started to beat faster. Was he about to scold her? Thank her? Dismiss her? Then he stopped beside her, turned to face the room, and looked each person in the eye, one by one. Asked when it finally came. It was calm, but carried the power of someone used to being listened to. "I want you all to listen carefully," Mr. Drake said, "because what I'm about to say will change everything." The tension in the room thickened like fog. "This young woman," he continued, "was not invited here for decoration. She was not here to waste our time. She came here because she now owns the majority of this company." Someone actually gasped. "What?" Another board member whispered out loud, blinking in confusion. Mr. Drake didn't flinch. "You heard me. As of this morning, Emily Walker, yes, the same young woman you just mocked, now holds 51% of shares in this company. She is, legally and officially, the chairwoman of the board." A wave of disbelief swept across the room. Some board members reached for the folders in front of them, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. A legal advisor at the side of the room stepped forward and confirmed it. "I have the documents right here," the advisor said. Over the past year, shares were quietly acquired by several investment groups, all traced back to one person, Miss Emily Walker. Everything is legitimate. Paperwork has been verified by both internal and external legal teams. Stopped. The laughing stopped. What remained were pale faces and stunned silence. One of the older board members stood up, "This can't be true," he said, voice shaking. She's just a girl from a farm. What kind of game is this?" Emily finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried strength. "I'm not here to play games," she said. "And yes, I grew up on a farm. That farm taught me more about leadership, risk, failure, strategy than most of you will learn sitting behind this table your whole life." Another man, clearly panicked, looked at Mr. Drake. "You knew? You let this happen?" Mr. Drake turned toward him with a cool stare. "I watched it happen. I let it happen because I believed in it. And unlike many of you, I actually listened to her ideas instead of laughing at her shoes." The room grew even quieter. Emily stepped forward now, her confidence growing with each second. "I know many of you don't respect me. That's fine. I didn't come here for your respect. I came because I believe this company can be more than what it is. I've studied every part of it. I've seen the waste, the lost potential, the lazy strategies. You've grown fat on easy profits and forgotten how to build from the ground up, but I haven't." Someone dared to challenge her. "What gives you the right to think you can lead a company of this size?" Emily looked directly at him. "Because I've already built something bigger, with fewer resources, and zero help from people like you." There was a heavy silence after that. Everyone was trying to process what was happening. Mr. Drake looked at her and gave a nod of approval. She has the vision. She has the experience. And now she has the power. You can either get on board with it or find the exit. Emily let out a breath. She hadn't expected this part to feel so emotional. But standing here in front of the people who just an hour ago had laughed at her like a child pretending to be an adult was more than just satisfying. It was justice. She opened her laptop again, not to present slides but to display a document. On the large screen behind her was a new vision statement for the company. Simple, direct, real. From today forward, she said, we operate with purpose. We move toward sustainable growth. We cut waste not just in resources, but in talent. We hire based on skill, not background. And we invest in ideas that have roots, not just wings. Her words landed like stones in still water. Powerful, clear, impossible to ignore. Some board members still looked lost. Us. Others were impressed. A few, it seemed, were beginning to realize that maybe they had underestimated the wrong person. Mr. Drake stepped aside, letting her take his place at the front of the room. The symbolism wasn't missed by anyone. She stood straight, hands on the table, and said one last thing. This board may be full of people with powerful titles, but today I bring something more powerful than a title. I bring truth, action, and the ability to lead without fear. Then she turned to Mr. Drake and nodded. He returned the gesture. As of this moment, he said officially, Emily Walker is your new chairwoman. One by one, the members of the board stood. Some did so awkwardly, some did it with respect. Others simply followed, unsure of what to feel. But they stood. And in that simple act, the old world inside that boardroom began to crumble and a new one began to rise. Outside the tall glass windows, the city continued as always, cars honking, people walking, lights flickering on in office buildings. But inside that room, everything had changed. The young woman they had laughed at had just taken her seat at the head of the table, not with noise, not with revenge, but with quiet strength, hard-earned wisdom, and the unshakable roots of a farmer who had never stopped believing in herself. The moment Emily became the chairwoman, everything inside the company changed, whether people were ready or not. The air in the boardroom was different now. The same people who had laughed at her earlier were sitting quietly trying to process the new reality. Some were still in shock. Others were scared. A few were already thinking about how to stay close to her, now that she had the power. Emily didn't waste time. The very next day, she returned to the company headquarters early in the morning, before most employees had even arrived. Through the building with a small notebook in her hand and calm eyes that noticed everything, she greeted the cleaning staff. She stopped to ask the receptionist how long she had worked there. She peeked into the cafeteria and spoke to the cooks. No one had ever seen a company leader do that before. Some were confused, Others were moved, but most didn't know who she was until someone whispered, "That's the new chairwoman." She didn't need to say much. Her actions spoke louder than words. Later that day, she called her first meeting not just with the board, but with department heads, team leads, and even junior managers. People filled the room nervously, unsure what to expect. Rumors had already started spreading. Some believed she was going to fire half the company. Others thought she might sell it off. Some hoped she'd disappear quickly and let things return to normal. Emily stood at the front, simple as always, no flashy dress, no gold watch, no loud voice. But her presence was powerful. She looked around and said, "I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to sell this company. I'm here to fix what's broken and build what's missing." There was silence. She continued, "I've spent the last year studying everything. The financials, the workflow, the people. And what I see is a company that forgot how to grow. It's not just profits, but people." Some nodded. Others looked uneasy. Emily held up a file. "This is a list of projects that were rejected last year. Most of them came from junior staff. Some had real potential, but they were dismissed because the people behind them weren't high enough in the hierarchy." She placed the file on the table. "That stops now," she said. "Starting today, every employee from the top floor to the mailroom will have a voice." There was a shift in the room. For the first time, people started leaning forward instead of leaning back. They were curious now. Emily went on to introduce something no one expected: weekly town hall meetings. Every Friday, anyone in the company could stand up and pitch an idea, share a concern, or ask a question directly to her and the leadership team. No filters. No delays. Some executives looked nervous. One even asked, "But won't that be chaotic?" Emily smiled slightly. Growth is always a little messy in the beginning. But she didn't stop there. She launched a new program called Farm to Future. It was inspired by her background, but it wasn't about farming. It was about grounding every business decision in long-term thinking, just like how farmers plan for seasons, not weeks. Under this program, she changed how departments set goals. No more chasing quick wins or impressing investors with temporary numbers. From now on, they'd focus on sustainable growth projects that might take time, but would last longer and serve more people. She also introduced mentorship programs, where senior employees had to mentor 2 junior staff members every quarter. Promotions would no longer be based on who had the loudest voice or the fanciest degree, but on creativity, hard work, problem solving. Not everyone liked the changes. Some old board members tried to resist. One executive even came to her office and said, "With all due respect, this isn't a small-town project. This is a billion-dollar company. You can't run it like a community center." Emily listened calmly and replied, "You're right. It is a billion-dollar company. That's why we can't afford to keep running it like an exclusive club where only a few get to make decisions." Over time, the culture began to shift. Younger employees, who had always stayed quiet, began to speak up. Quiet software engineers shared an idea during a town hall about using AI to reduce delivery delays. Emily listened carefully, encouraged her, and gave her a small team to test it. 3 months later, Sophie's project had saved the company nearly $2 million in the past. Sophie's idea would have died in her email draft now. It was leading to major changes across departments. Emily also started visiting different branches of the company. She didn't announce these visits. She just showed up. In one city office, she sat with the customer service team for a full day, answering calls, reading complaints, and talking to frustrated customers. When someone asked why she was doing it, she said, "How can I fix what I don't understand?" Her style of leadership confused some people. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't rush. But she moved forward like a steady train slow at first, but impossible to stop, and results started to show. Employee satisfaction went up, customer complaints went down, profits didn't fall, as some feared. In fact, they began to rise, but more steadily this time, not from one-time tricks or risky shortcuts, but from smart systems and real teamwork. The media took notice. One magazine ran a headline, the farmer's daughter who planted seeds of change in a concrete empire. Reporters started calling her the people's chairwoman. Still, Emily kept her focus. She replaced a few top executives not because they were old, but because they were stuck in old thinking. In their place, she hired people with fresh facet minds, even if their resumes weren't shiny. Some came from community startups, others from failed businesses where they had learned valuable lessons. One came from a homeless shelter, where he had been volunteering to teach coding to teens. Emily believed in people who had lived before they led. The company, once seen as a cold corporate machine, started gaining a reputation for innovation and humanity. One day, a former board member who had once laughed at her walked into her office. "I'll be honest," he said. "When you walked into that boardroom, I thought it was a joke. I thought you'd be gone in a week." Emily didn't smile. She just looked at him and said, "You weren't the only one." He sighed. "I was wrong," she nodded. "I know." He looked at her with something close to admiration. "You're rebuilding something I didn't even know was broken." Emily leaned back and said, "It wasn't just broken, it was rotten underneath. We're pulling out the weeds now." Before he left, he said something that stuck with her. "You don't run this company like a CEO. You run it like a farmer." Emily finally smiled. "That's the highest compliment you could have given me." By the end of that year, the company had changed not just in structure, but in spirit. People came to work with pride. Leaders listened more than they spoke. Small ideas were valued. Mistakes were discussed openly. Progress was slow, but real. And Emily. She still visited her family farm every few weeks. She helped her father fix broken gates. She walked the fields in boots. She watched the sunset from the porch with a cup of tea. Fame hadn't changed her. Power hadn't made her proud. She stayed grounded, like the soil that raised her. One day, while watching her father dig up weeds near the fence, she asked, "Did you ever think I'd end up where I am now?" Her father smiled, dirt on his hands. "I didn't know where you'd end up, but I always knew you'd rise." She stood there in silence, heart full, because now she wasn't just leading a company. She was creating something new. A place where people mattered, where ideas mattered, where no one would ever again be laughed at for their roots, their accent, or their plain shoes. Emily wasn't just a chairwoman. She was a builder of bridges, a lifter of voices, and proof that no dream is too small when planted in the right soil. The boardroom was full once again. But this time, everything was different. Months had passed since Emily had taken over as chairwoman. What used to be a cold and tense space had now become a room of ideas, energy, and purpose. The people sitting around the table no longer whispered jokes or looked down on those who spoke quietly. There was a new atmosphere, one of respect, hope, and quiet excitement. Emily sat at the head of the table, the same seat where not long ago she had stood nervously with her laptop, while people laughed and judged her. No, they waited for her to speak, not because they feared her, but because they trusted her. Today's meeting was important. The company had invited key investors, media guests, and new international partners. Everyone wanted to see the miracle that had taken place in such a short time. The projector screen behind Emily showed numbers. But not just any numbers, real proof of the company's transformation. Sales were up. Customer loyalty had improved. The employee resignation rate had dropped by nearly 70%. Even small departments that had once been ignored were now producing big results. Projects led by interns and junior staff were being implemented company-wide. But what surprised most people was not the growth, i.e., was how the growth had happened. No massive ad campaigns, no risky takeovers, no firing of thousands of employees, just smart leadership, patience, and a return to strong roots. Emily stood up and looked around the room. "I know many of you remember the first time I stood in this room." She began, voice calm but powerful. "That day, some people laughed. Some ignored me. A few wanted me gone. Some people in the room looked down, clearly remembering their behavior." Emily continued. "But that moment taught me something important. The world doesn't need louder voices. It needs listening ears. It doesn't need more bosses. It needs more leaders. There was silence in the room. Not uncomfortable silence, but deep silence. Like everyone was taking in her words fully, she walked slowly toward the screen and pointed to a chart showing the company's steady rise. These results didn't come from me alone. It came from all of us, especially the people who were never given a chance before. She looked toward the corner of the room where Sophie, the young software engineer who once pitched an idea during a town hall, was sitting. Emily smiled and said, "Sophie's algorithm now runs our entire logistics system." She had never spoken in a meeting before we gave her the floor. Then she turned toward an older man near the door. Mr. Kent from the mailroom had an idea about paper waste. That one suggestion has saved us over $100,000 in 6 months. People clapped, not because they were told to, but because they felt proud. Emily stepped back toward her seat, but didn't sit. She placed both hands on the table and said, "What this company has learned is simple. You don't need to look or sound powerful to make powerful changes." A hand was raised from the media section. A reporter stood up and asked, "Chairwoman Walker, many people still talk about that first boardroom moment. If you could go back and relive that day, would you do anything differently?" Emily thought. For a moment, no, she said. That day was important. Not just for me, but for everyone watching. Sometimes people need to see you at your lowest to appreciate your rise. Another hand went up. Young man asked, "What do you say to people who think someone from a simple background can't run a billion-dollar company?" Emily looked straight at him. "I say watch me." Laughter filled the room, but it was the good kind now, not mocking, not sarcastic. It was joyful, warm. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Drake, the former CEO who had supported Emily from the start, stood up from his seat. He walked slowly to the front of the room, nodded to her, and said, "I'd like to say something." Everyone went quiet again. Mr. Drake looked around and said, "I've spent most of my career building this company. I've seen it rise, fall, struggle, and survive. But I've never seen it breathe like it does now." He turned to Emily. "When you first came here, you reminded me of someone I once knew, my younger self, before I forgot what really mattered. I thought I had seen it all. But then I watched you walk into this room, face a wall of judgment, and still speak your truth. And I knew this company was finally in good hands." Emily felt emotion rise in her throat, but she stayed composed. Mr. Drake handed her a small box and said, "This belonged to the first founder of the company. It's been passed down to every leader who made a true difference. Today, it belongs to you." She opened the box. Inside was a silver pin in the shape of a tree, its roots long and deep, its branches strong and wide. The symbol of growth. Emily pinned it to her jacket, then nodded with quiet pride. She didn't need a crown. This was better. After the ceremony, a large lunch was arranged on the rooftop garden of the building a space. Emily had helped create 4 employees to relax and feel connected to nature. It had plants, fruit trees, wooden benches, and even a small fountain. People walked around smiling, eating, sharing stories. A group of junior staff gathered around Emily, laughing as they told her about a funny idea for a new office coffee system. Emily listened, nodded, and said, "Draw it up. Let's see if it works." No one was afraid to speak to her anymore, far from the city. In her hometown, her father was watching the live broadcast from the porch. He sipped tea slowly, his weathered hands holding the cup steady. His old friends sat beside him, eyes wide. "Is that your daughter?" one of them asked. He smiled. "That's my girl." Later that evening, Emily returned home. Even though she was now one of the most powerful women in business, she still preferred the quiet of the farm. She walked through the fields barefoot, the cool soil reminding her where she came from. The stars above looked brighter here. She sat on the porch next to her father. "You did it," he said. Emily looked out at the horizon and whispered, "No, Dad, we did it." He chuckled. "I only taught you how to feed chickens." Laughed. "And that taught me more about leadership than any book ever could." That night, Emily thought about everything. The laughter, the judgment, the fear, but also the strength, the trust, the change. She had started as someone they all doubted, but now she had become someone they all admired, and it didn't happen because she shouted louder or looked richer. It happened because she stayed true to herself. The next morning, she returned to the city. There was more work to do, more voices to lift, more ideas to plant, because in her heart, Emily Walker would always be a farmer, not just of crops, but of hope, of dignity, and of dreams. And this time, no one was laughing. They were watching, listening, and learning.